My son poured me wine and slid a guardianship packet across the table. He still thought I was a lonely widow. He had no idea. My attorney was ringing the bell at 7:15. My son poured me wine. Merlot. Good label. The kind you buy when you want someone to feel warm before you do something cold to them. He'd already slid the folder across the coffee table before I'd even set my coat down. A cream-colored legal packet, thick as a small Bible, with the words "Petition for Appointment of Guardian of Person and Estate" printed in clean serif type across the cover page. He said it the way you'd explain a car's safety features. Matter of fact, almost kind. It's very common, Mom. Lots of families do this proactively. That was Emma, standing near the fireplace in her cashmere sweater, one hand wrapped around her own wine glass, the other pressed flat against her sternum like she was holding her own heart steady. She'd rehearsed that line. I could tell by the way her eyes didn't quite land on mine when she said it. Jake, my son, my firstborn, the boy I drove 45 minutes each way to piano lessons for 6 years, leaned forward from the armchair across from me and said, with practiced patience, "It would be much simpler if you cooperate voluntarily." I looked at my watch. 7:14. "I'm going to wait just 1 minute," I said pleasantly. "There are a few more people joining us." The silence that followed was extraordinary. I've lived 73 years, and I've learned that silence has texture. The silence in that room had the texture of two people realizing, simultaneously, that they may have made a very serious mistake. Jake looked at Emma. Emma looked at Jake. Neither of them looked at me. They hadn't looked at me, really looked, in 11 years. That was their first and most fatal error. Part 2. The Widow and the Wall. Let me tell you about the woman my children thought they were sitting across from that December evening. After my husband Richard died 11 years ago, I had $2,300 in a checking account and a view of a brick wall. That was it. Richard had been the face of everything. The relationships, the deals, the dinners, the handshakes. Our name was on nothing that was actually ours. His business partner, Gerald, had structured it that way on purpose, and I knew it for 20 years and said nothing, because Richard believed in Gerald the way some men believe in God. Quietly, absolutely, immune to evidence. The day after the funeral, Jake took me to lunch at the club. He looked across the white tablecloth and said, "You're resilient, Mom. You'll figure it out." Then he picked up his phone. Emma sent a grocery gift card, $250, from her 4-bedroom house in Westport, Connecticut, with the double garage and the au pair. I moved into a rooming house in New Haven, shared bathroom at the end of the hall, radiator that clanked every night at 2 a.m., like it had something to confess. And I went to work. 31 years of watching Richard build deals. The lunches I attended, the contracts I read while he was on the phone, the financial documents I quietly absorbed over 3 decades because I am, despite what my children apparently believed, not a decorative object, had given me an education that no MBA program teaches. I understood risk. I understood leverage. I understood that a great deal of what separates wealthy people from everyone else is simply the willingness to act when everyone else hesitates. I called in favors from 3 men Richard had helped years ago who owed him, and by extension owed me, a debt of conscience. I found a small distressed commercial property in Bridgeport that every broker in the city had written off. I restructured it, leased it, sold it 14 months later for a number that made my hands shake when I signed the paperwork. I didn't celebrate. I reinvested. I did it again and again. I worked methodically, quietly, and alone. I kept my name out of press releases. I used holding companies. I paid excellent attorneys to structure things so that nothing traced back to Dorothy Callahan in any obvious way. Not out of shame, not out of paranoia. Out of the very specific knowledge that the moment people know a 70-year-old widow has money, they begin planning how to take it. I was right about that, as it turned out. Today, Callahan Capital Partners holds assets valued at approximately $890 million. My children, as of last October, had no idea. They thought I lived in a penthouse apartment, a rented one, supported by a modest investment portfolio Richard had left me. They thought I was a woman who occasionally needed help opening jars. They thought, when they looked at me, that they saw the future and the future was manageable. That was their second error. Part 3. The shift I noticed it first in the air. Last October, Jake started calling to arrange weekly brunch. Warm, attentive, easy. The kind of warmth that doesn't cost anything to perform, but costs something to mean. He asked about my health. He walked me to my car afterward. Once, he took my arm going down steps I have navigated perfectly well for 2 decades. I told myself, maybe he's growing. Maybe losing his father finally caught up with him. Maybe this is the version of my son I always hoped for. But I am not a sentimental woman. I am a woman who has survived a rooming house and a brick wall view and built something extraordinary from $2,300 and the determined refusal to sit quietly and wait to be rescued. I know the difference between warmth and weather. Emma started calling on Wednesdays. "Mom, do you remember what we talked about last week?" We hadn't talked. She did it 3 weeks in a row. The third time, I set the phone down on the kitchen counter after we hung up and stood there for a full minute. My tea was steeping. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, and I felt, with complete clarity, that my children were building something I wasn't supposed to know about. I bought a small brown leather notebook from the stationery shop around the corner, moleskin, the kind with the elastic band. I wrote down every call, every visit, every question, date, time, content, what was said, and, more importantly, what was being constructed. Then my bank called, November 3rd, 10:42 a.m. A compliance officer named Daniel Reyes, 12 years with First National, he told me, and he had the measured, careful voice of someone who has made unpleasant calls before. Someone posing as my daughter Emma had called 2 days earlier, attempting to obtain 24 months of my account records. They'd presented false authorization. The request had been flagged because the caller's phone number didn't match any number on my account profile. Then he told me something else. Someone posing as an attorney, a James Hargrove of Hargrove and Associates in Hartford, had separately attempted to access 5 years of my tax returns through a firm that manages some of my older accounts. I wrote down the name. I ended the call. I went to the Connecticut State Bar directory and searched for James Hargrove. No results. I searched the entire Northeast region. Nothing. I sat very still at my kitchen table for what might have been 4 minutes or might have been 40. I am not sure. My tea had gone cold. I was aware of a particular quality of attention settling over me, the kind I hadn't felt since those early months in the rooming house, when every decision had weight. Then I picked up my pen. Part 4. The folder. It was an accident, and then it wasn't. Jake had been using my old tablet when he visited in November. He'd forgotten his phone charger and needed to look something up, and I'd handed him the device without thinking. He returned it before he left. I put it back on the kitchen counter. 2 days later, I picked it up to read the news and noticed the mail application was still open. Jake had logged in with his own credentials and forgotten to log out. I should have closed it immediately. I almost did. Instead, and I want to be clear that I understand the moral complexity of what I'm about to tell you, I sat down at the kitchen table, set my coffee cup to my right, and began to read. He had a folder. He had named it, with the particular unself-consciousness of someone who never imagined anyone would look. Mom. Inside, 14 emails spanning 6 weeks. The first was from someone named Dr. Frederick Altman, described in a subsequent email by Jake's attorney as highly experienced in capacity evaluations for estate planning purposes. I looked up Dr. Frederick Altman later that evening. He had testified in 11 guardianship cases in the previous 4 years. He had never once in any of those cases found the subject mentally competent. His rate was $8,500 per evaluation. The second thread involved the attorney Jake had been working with. His name was actually James Hargrove, not a ghost, just unlicensed in Connecticut, operating out of a Rhode Island office. He specialized, his website explained, in contested estate matters and elder law consultation. The third thread contained a document, a timeline. They planned to file a petition for guardianship on December 15th. They had chosen December 15th specifically, as Jake's email to Hargrove explained, because court calendars run light over the holidays and initial hearings are harder to contest quickly. They intended to use Dr. Altman's evaluation to establish incapacity. The evaluation had apparently already been drafted based on Emma's written testimony about my memory lapses and confused phone conversations. Dr. Altman had never met me, had never spoken to me, had never been in the same room as me. He had already written his conclusion. I read it twice. Then I closed the tablet. I walked to the kitchen sink, turned on the cold water, and pressed both wrists under it for about 30 seconds. I don't know exactly why. It's something I've done since I was a girl when I needed to come back to myself. Then I called Victor Ashworth. Victor has been my attorney for 9 years. He is 61 years old, has a voice like a library, and the patience of someone who has seen nearly everything. When I told him what I'd found, there was a pause. Not the pause of surprise, but the pause of a man reorganizing priorities in real time. I'll put the kettle on, he said. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. I was there in 17. Part 5, building the counter. What followed was 9 days of extremely quiet, extremely methodical work. Victor called in Dr. Priya Subramaniam. Dr. Subramaniam is a neuropsychologist on the faculty of Yale School of Medicine. She has consulted for the Department of Justice, has published 47 peer-reviewed papers on cognitive assessment, and has testified in over 200 legal proceedings across 20 states. She has, in Victor's words, never been successfully challenged on methodology in a courtroom. Her waitlist for independent evaluations is typically 4 months. Victor called in a favor. She saw me on December 4th. The evaluation lasted 3.5 hours. She administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the trail-making test, a full neuropsychological battery, and a lengthy structured interview. She looked at my financial records, not to assess my wealth, but to assess the complexity of the decision-making they represented. Her report was 11 pages long. I will quote only the relevant paragraph. Mrs. Callahan demonstrates exceptional cognitive function across all assessed domains, including executive function, working memory, verbal fluency, processing speed, and abstract reasoning. Her scores fall in the superior range for her age cohort and, in several measures, for the general adult population. There is no clinical basis for any concern whatsoever regarding her capacity to manage her personal affairs or estate. 11 pages. One paragraph that ended their plan before they had filed a single document. Meanwhile, Victor's associate, a forensic accountant named Patricia Wells, who spent 12 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, began the process of documenting the attempted fraud against my accounts, the false power of attorney submission, the fake attorney identity, the coordinated attempt to access my financial records under false pretenses. Patricia was methodical in the way that people are when they have spent years building cases that have to hold up in federal court. By December 6th, Victor had helped me move $890 million into an irrevocable trust, properly structured, protected by statute. The trust named 3 independent trustees: Victor, a former federal judge named Helen Marsh, and the director of a charitable foundation I'd supported for years. Not a dollar could move without a unanimous vote of all 3. My children children, if they had succeeded, would have gained guardianship over my person and my estate. They would have found the estate locked in an irrevocable trust that they had no legal standing to touch. I want you to understand that I did not do this out of rage. I did it because when you discover that the people you love are capable of this, the appropriate response is not to fall apart. The appropriate response is to build something they cannot reach. Part 6. The Invitation. Jake called on December 13th. Warm, easy, nothing out of the ordinary. He suggested dinner at his house on December 17th, 2 days after their filing deadline. He was confident by then that the petition had been filed and that the holiday calendar was working in their favor. He didn't know Victor had been monitoring the court docket. No petition had been filed. The deadline had passed. Dress warmly, Jake said. They're saying it'll be cold. I'll wear layers, I said. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I called Victor, told him the date, and we finalized the last of the paperwork. Victor would arrive with his 2 associates, Marcus Chen, who manages document delivery for complex estate matters, and a woman named Grace, who has a very particular talent for sitting very quietly in rooms where people are losing control of themselves. Victor coached me on one thing only. Let them finish, he said. Everything. Don't interrupt, don't react, don't show them anything until it's time. I know, I said. Dorothy, let them finish. Victor, I said, I have been patient since October. Part 7. The Room. Revisited. Here is what those 9 minutes felt like from the inside. Jake's living room is decorated in the style of someone who reads architectural magazines. Clean lines, expensive furniture, the suggestion of taste assembled by a professional. There is a fireplace. Emma stood near it, as I've said, in the cashmere sweater. She'd driven up from Connecticut for this. They let me settle in. They poured the wine. Then Jake picked up the folder from the side table. He'd had it staged, I noticed, within reach, and slid it across the coffee table with a deliberateness that told me he had rehearsed this moment, had perhaps even practiced the angle of the slide. We've been worried, Emma began, for a while now. We've noticed some things, Mom, some small things that— Memory, Jake added. Yes, and just, we want to make sure you're protected. That's all this is. The folder was cream-colored. Petition for appointment of guardian of person and estate. Same cover page. James Hargrove of Rhode Island, listed as petitioning attorney. Jake said, there's a doctor's opinion in there from a very well-regarded specialist. He's evaluated you based on what you told him, I said. A beat. Based on documented concerns, Jake said carefully. I nodded. I looked at my watch. 7:14. I said, I'm going to wait just 1 minute. There are a few more people joining us. And I described the silence already. At 7:15, I stood, walked to the front door, and opened it myself. Victor came in first, tall, in his good coat, carrying a document case. Then Marcus Chen, with 2 additional cases. Then Grace, who nodded pleasantly at everyone and sat down in the corner chair as though she'd been invited. Victor placed his own folder on the table. He put it precisely on top of their folder. Then he sat down, placed his hands together, and said, in the voice I have always loved for its absolute absence of drama, my name is Victor Ashworth. I've been Mrs. Callahan's attorney of record for 9 years. I'd like to walk through a few items this evening if you'll allow me. Jake's face went through 5 expressions in about 4 seconds. I watched all 5. There is something very particular about watching someone realize that what they believed was their plan was actually someone else's plan. Victor laid out the documentation with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has spent decades doing exactly this. Bank fraud, the false power of attorney submission, Patricia Wells's forensic report, the phone records from the attempt on my tax returns, the non-existent Connecticut bar registration for James Hargrove, 14 emails from a folder Jake himself had named Mom, Dr. Altman's history of paid testimony in 11 consecutive cases, everyone finding incapacity, the statistical impossibility of which Victor had already briefed to the Connecticut State Medical Licensing Board. Then the psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Priya Subramaniam of Yale School of Medicine. Victor placed it open to the final paragraph. 11 pages. Marcus handed Jake a copy. Marcus handed Emma a copy. Emma read it, then read it again. Then Victor placed the last document on the table. 1 page. At the top, Callahan Capital Partners. Trust summary, executed December 6th. At the bottom, 1 number. $890,000. Jake read the number. Read it again. He looked up at me. I am not certain he had ever really looked at me before. Not the way he looked at me in that moment. Emma made a sound that wasn't quite a word. A small, soft, collapsing sound. She set her wine glass down on the mantelpiece, and her hand was not quite steady. I picked up my phone from the coffee table. I buttoned my blazer. I stood. I loved you both well, I said. What you did with that love is entirely on you. I walked out through the door I had entered, into the cold December night. The air was sharp and clean, and I breathed it in and felt, for the first time since October, that the weight of carrying all of it had lifted. Behind me, the room was completely silent. Part 8. What Victor said at the car. His hand on my arm stopped me at the car. Dorothy, I turned. His face in the porch light was serious in the way it gets when he is about to tell me something he wishes he didn't have to. There's something else. Something we found that I haven't told you yet. I held his gaze. Patricia found it while she was doing the financial forensics. There was a third party involved in the account access attempts. Someone who provided the original financial information, the account numbers, the name of your tax management firm that allowed them to make those calls in the first place. I waited. It was Richard's former partner, Gerald. I stood in the cold for a moment. Gerald, the man who had spent 2 decades structuring Richard's affairs so that nothing would remain for me, who had sent flowers to the funeral and shaken my hand and said, with a face full of genuine-looking sorrow, "Dorothy, Richard would be so proud of you." He'd been in contact with Jake since March, Victor said quietly. 8 months. He apparently knew, or suspected, that Richard may have disclosed more about our early conversations than we realized. He was afraid you might pursue certain claims against him. He thought that neutralizing your legal capacity was the safest way to protect himself, I said. Yes, I thought about March. I thought about the first brunch, Jake's sudden warmth, the shift in air pressure I'd felt before the sky changed. I thought about Gerald, who knew exactly what I was worth to him as a threat, and had done the calculation and decided to act. I had made an error. I had assumed this was only my children. The referral to Hargrove came from Gerald's network, Victor continued. Dr. Altman as well. Gerald has been involved in this from the beginning. Patricia's report is complete and documented. The state bar will receive Gerald's file in the morning. The fraud referral to the Connecticut AG goes out simultaneously. There's also the matter of certain representations he made to your account's trustees in 2012 that Patricia has now documented quite thoroughly. And what kind of representations? Victor's expression was the kind that precedes a number. Approximately $14 million worth, he said, over 4 years before Richard died. I stood there in the cold December air, 11 years of a brick wall view and a shared bathroom and 31 calls to rebook and 3 men who owed a debt of conscience all settling somewhere behind my sternum. Victor, I said, is the civil claim viable? Patricia believes so. So do I. I nodded once. Schedule it. He nodded. Opened my car door. I got in. He closed it. I drove home through the dark along roads I have known for decades. The heater came on slowly. The city lights were soft at the edges through the windshield. I thought about Richard, about the years I'd spent in that passenger seat, watching him build things, absorbing everything he never thought to teach me because it never occurred to him that I might need it. I thought about the rooming house and the radiator that clanked at 2 a.m. and the $2,300 and the absolute refusal, somewhere in the core of me, to collapse. I thought about Jake sliding that folder across the table like a chess piece. I thought about Gerald, calculating. I thought about the look on my son's face when he read the number on that page, and I thought, they built this. Every part of it. They handed me the materials. Epilogue. 6 months later. Gerald Marsh, because Gerald's last name is Marsh, as it happens, which I find no less ironic now than I did the night Victor told me, resigned from his firm in February, the week before the Connecticut Attorney General's office announced it was pursuing charges of financial fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and several additional counts that his attorney is still working to contain. His firm's other partners moved swiftly and decisively to separate themselves. His Darien home has been on the market since March. James Hargrove surrendered his Rhode Island law license in January and is cooperating with investigators. Dr. Frederick Altman's license is under formal review by the State Medical Board. His testimony in the 11 prior guardianship cases is being re-examined by 3 separate courts. Jake has not called me. Emma called once in January. She said, I didn't know about Gerald. She may even be telling the truth. I haven't decided yet what to do with that. Victor and I settled the civil claim against Gerald's estate in April. I won't disclose the number. It was significant. I still live in my apartment. Still have the view I chose. Not a brick wall, not a penthouse, just a quiet corner of a city I love, with good light in the mornings and a kettle that takes exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds to boil. I know because I have timed it over and over in the early mornings when I sit with my small brown leather notebook and write down what I notice. Old habits. The trust remains irrevocable. The 3 trustees remain in place. Victor calls on Thursdays. Patricia Wells sends quarterly reports. Dr. Subramaniam and I had coffee last month. She had questions about one of my real estate investments for a paper she's writing on cognitive performance in older adults, and I had questions about the neuroscience of motivated reasoning. We talked for 2 hours. I drove home through spring rain, windows slightly open, thinking about the moment I sat across from my children in that room and looked at my watch and said, I'm going to wait just 1 minute. 1 minute. 11 years of a rooming house. 11 years of quiet and methodical and alone. For 1 minute. They never understood what that minute cost them. They never understood that the woman sitting across from them that night, the woman they had filled with good wine and wrapped in practiced concern and handed a legal packet she was supposed to sign, had already filed the counter motion in the only court that mattered, the one where you build, brick by brick, from $2,300 and a view of a wall until nobody can touch you. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost.